Hey, what's going on everyone? It's Joe from Gadgetry Tech. And yes, I'm reviewing a computer today. This is kind of the beginning of the expansion of the channel. I'm going to be still covering a lot of the audio and doing all the game guides, but I've been an avid computer builder, DIY hobbyist for a long time, and I wanted to start covering some other categories that just frankly I enjoy messing with. So we're starting off with a bang because today we're going to talk about the new Alienware Area-51. Now, if you're familiar with Alienware and the Area-51, this has actually been out for a while. This video is going to be a little bit different because at the timing of releasing this video, this now has an AMD processor available. The Intel variant is still being sold, and you can of course spec it in many different configurations both for AMD and Intel. This one in particular is their flagship. It's using a 9950 X3D with the RTX 5090. I wanted to do something a little bit different with this video. So one, huge thanks to Alienware because they did send this to me for review. I don't do any kickbacks or monetary exchange. I don't get paid to make content. I refuse to get money for making reviews. So just so you know, no money was exchanged there. What is special about this video to me is not only did I get the flagship AMD version, but I also got the flagship Intel version with the i9-285K. Now prices obviously change a lot because of market fluctuations, and I think the value segment kind of focuses on what the current market pricing is at the time of watching this when you're ready to make your decision. So my unit, as of today, as configured, the AMD one is $5,750, and that comes with the 5090, of course, the flagship AMD chip, 64 gigabytes of RAM, and 2 terabytes of Gen 5 SSD memory. So the Intel one is spec'd almost the same, except we of course switched to an Intel processor, and that does lower the price. It's $5,050 again at the time of filming this. I also wanted to provide 2 custom DIY builds with comparable components to the Alienware, just so we can kind of see how it stacks up to current market pricing for stuff that's available to buy today. It's one thing to look at an MSRP for a 5090, which has been more readily available at $2,000, but not all the time. And as the time of filming this today, I can't buy one for $2,000. So the least expensive one I could buy on Amazon right now is from MSI, and it's $2,450. So that's the price that I added to the DIY build of both units. I didn't go overboard with the motherboards, but they're decently equipped with a good network card, multiple USB ports, and of course I wanted to match the chipset that's found in Alienware. On the case is kind of a gray area because you're going to pick whatever case you like anyway. I picked the Asus ProArt because it's a very premium case with very strong cooling. It has 2 really good fans up front, for example, and this is a hardcore case. It's an 80-liter case, and you are no doubt paying for some of that. So on the DIY side, yeah, you can buy a $100 or less case and fit all these same components in there, but you're not going to get the same overhead and volume as something like this mammoth. And I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing makes me look pretty small in the camera, so it's a pretty ridiculous case. So I picked the Asus ProArt just to have some parity on the case build quality and design side of things. That too will affect the price, and you can obviously tweak as you will. DIY prices versus the Alienware builds kind of favors the Intel side a little bit better from a pre-built side, and if you're going DIY, there's more of a value of building it yourself, but you obviously don't get the convenience of having it just full plug and play. With the Alienware or any pre-built system in general, it's nice to be able to just unbox it and play. Some people will pay more for that because your time is valuable, or you just don't want to tinker with stuff anymore, and you just like what this is offering. So the other advantage when you go with a pre-built, at least in this case, because it varies quite a bit, with Dell Alienware, you get the manufacturer warranty, of course, and they have the phone number for support. They even offer a premium service where you get an actual rep to talk to help troubleshoot. So that's kind of nice because it's the entire system package. You're not troubleshooting a single part. The other advantage, or at least optional thing they offer, is in-home support. I only bring this up, by the way, because I worked at Geek Squad years ago for quite a while. And these are not easy to lug around. This is an 80-liter case. It weighs over 70 pounds. It's kind of a pain. And this is glass. Things happen to glass when you move it. So one option is they offer in-home support. So it's all of these little things. Yes, that comes at a premium, but when you're spending this kind of money on a machine, it's just something to factor in because it's kind of that peace of mind thing. I still think DIY is a more rewarding experience for me personally because I like tinkering with stuff and I don't mind saving the money. And if things break, then yeah, I'll have to troubleshoot it myself. But there's obviously a case for the pre-built market for those that just want to plug it in and go. So not all pre-builts are easy to service or upgrade parts. And Dell and Alienware has been known to have that issue with certain pre-builts in the past, and some models to this day. The Area-51 kind of changes that, at least with the new design, because everything is more standard. You can basically replace almost every component in this case it might take a little bit more work for wiring and stuff. And the reason why I say that is this does use a standard ATX motherboard. Very easy to switch the motherboard out. The motherboard in this case uses a 12VO connector because that's what the power supply has. It's hand in hand. So if you ever replace the motherboard, you either have to get another 12VO motherboard, which means 12 voltage or volts only. It has a much smaller connector. Otherwise, you have to replace the power supply as well. Now, this is a 1500 watt platinum power supply. It's an awesome power supply. So it's kind of wasteful to do a pre-built and then have to replace all of that if you want to upgrade one day. Hopefully you don't have to. On the AMD side, there's obviously typically more socket support for future generations, whereas Intel, you kind of have a shorter generation run because they're already going to be replacing the socket again. That's a very common thing with Intel. So keep that in mind from a longevity standpoint as far as upgrades go. The rest of it is pretty straightforward because it still has USB 3.0 headers, it has fan headers and everything. They do custom locations for a few of these headers though, so if you are replacing the motherboard, again, just keep in mind if you're using all the other stock components from Alienware, you might have to change the cable routing to make sure it still all connects okay. Now, one cool thing about this case that you don't really see in the pictures unless you scroll down on the website to look at all the things about this case is it's a positive pressure case. All of the fans are blowing air inward and there's no exhaust fan. They do that for noise purposes, and basically this entire mesh opening in the back is where all of that airflow comes out. Now these fans are huge. It's not a perfect design because this rear fan is right above the power supply, so it doesn't really move a lot of air. However, this one gets more because there's an intake on the bottom, and those front 180 millimeter fans are quite thick. When you crank all of the fan profiles on manual mode to 100%, it is crazy loud because these blow a ton of air and you will feel a huge amount of air volume moving out the back. It's designed to cool over double the power consumption that it currently pulls when gaming. So there's more than enough thermal overhead. So if graphics cards get more powerful, or you're messing around with overclocking in some capacity, all that can generate more heat, so there's more than enough there. Typically, when you have super adequate cooling, that means you don't have to run the fans as hard because that can keep the noise down. So that brings me to the noise side of things. This flows a lot of air, and the fan profiles can be on the more aggressive side, partly because when I did a lot of testing, the AMD build from this particular one, the Area-51, ran at a slightly higher voltage than my system did, and as a result, it generated more heat. The CPU just ran a little bit hotter, so the fans had to compete with that. They never really ramped up to anything super aggressive, but as efficient as this design is, I think because of the higher voltage bias of the AMD chip, the fans were running just a little bit harder comparatively to the Intel system that Alienware also builds, and to my own 9950X3D where I did custom fan profiles. It's not terrible. I've definitely heard worse and I've dealt with worse myself, but one thing that is an advantage to the Intel system is noise, because even though the Intel system kind of lags behind AMD for the most part in gaming, obviously the gaps are closer in 4K, one of the advantages of the Intel system is under light to moderate loads, it consumes a little bit less power and it doesn't have as much of an aggressive fan ramp up even when you're gaming. What's different though for me is I am really into audio as well, and I use a lot of open back headphones that don't really block any noise. So PC noise is a very critical thing for me. This computer will auto switch profiles. So if you launch a game like CS2 or Cyberpunk, it's automatically going to switch to the performance profile and even change the RGB colors to match that game mode so it fits a whole common theme. The issue is when it ramps up to those aggressive profiles, it does increase fan noise. I play a lot of Arc Raiders recently. I've been really loving that game. And that game has such fun sound to listen to. And when I'm using an open back headphone, I don't want to hear the PC fan noise as much. It's more of a chill game and I don't need 300 plus frames per second to enjoy that game. Out of the box, the Intel system when gaming on that scenario is quieter, and as a result, just without messing with anything, I found it just more enjoyable when I need a lower noise floor. It's also really nice for video editing when it's not ramping up as much. However, you can customize the profiles of either system to go into quiet or balanced or go full custom and just ramp the fan speed down anyway. So I think noise is something to consider for day-to-day stuff. The Intel one is clearly quieter, but it's not like you can't tone down the AMD one to be a quieter system if you're willing to sacrifice just a little bit of performance.
Cable routing on the opposite side panel is excellent as well, and they even pre-ran wires in case you added your own 2.5 SSD or 3.5-inch hard drive at the bottom. There's also a rather large fan controller, and although Alienware is only using it for RGB control, there's plenty of outputs to handle fan speed as well. If you ever end up replacing your motherboard, you can still connect this daughter card to it. Alienware basically allows you to download and install the Alienware Command Center with your replacement motherboard and then interface with this card to still handle RGB and fan profile controls. As far as connectivity goes, both Area-51 machines are nearly identical. The only real differences is the two USB-C ports, with the AMD one using USB 4, which still supports up to 40 gigabits per second, and the Intel one offers two Thunderbolt 4 ports instead. Both of them also come with a 2.5 gig Ethernet network card, but the Intel one is using the Killer Networks card because they are owned by Intel. It's a similar story on the wireless side, with AMD using a MediaTek controller and the Intel machine using an Intel wireless card. The rest of the connectivity is basically the same, but there is a rather large amount of USB 2.0 ports still being used. I would have personally preferred USB 3.0 with the majority of these, but the rest of the connectivity is quite good, so that's the only real complaint.
If you're familiar with the 9950X3D and how it compares to the latest stuff from Intel, obviously there's going to be some performance expectations, but I did want to cover both as unbiased as possible and actually show you some real life measurements for how these two machines compare to each other, as well as my build, which is using a 9950X3D and a 5090 as well. I wanted to see how this stacked up. There is a little caveat on performance for the Area-51 AMD build because this is a pre-launch unit and the operating system had to be shipped in test mode to allow unsigned drivers. Basically, I got like a pre-launch version of the whole thing. Because of that, I had to do a mix and match of stuff. If I enabled secure boot and disabled test mode, it basically stopped certain drivers from loading, and it allowed me to run games that had, anti-cheat, like if I was playing Battlefield or Call of Duty or even Arc Raiders, for example. When I disabled the that mode, secure boot, and re-enabled test, I got better performance. So I was actually able to launch CS2 and do some PC testing, of course, and I typically got better overhead as this shipped to me in the test form. I think there's more potential here to extract out of this system. It's twofold because the BIOS optimizations I think would help between the memory controller and RAM timings, etc. But I also think personally they could have shipped a different RAM kit than what came on the Intel system. The out-of-the-box spec does support overclocking and I got much better performance. My unit shipped with overclocking turned off, so make sure either through Alienware Command Center or the BIOS that you enable overclocking because it's a quick, cheap performance boost. Ryzen scales really well once you hit 6,000 hertz. Anything below that, you are leaving some performance on the table. So just enabling the XMP mode on this BIOS was able to extract the performance that got me closer to what I was getting on my custom build.
When it comes to benchmarking, I just wanted to provide the specs of the machines I tested. Obviously, both Area-51s are here, and they do use the exact same Kingston RAM, both running XMP when enabled. It's a decent speed when XMP is enabled, but RAM timings are a little bit loose compared to the ones I used in my custom system, and that will play a part into certain game benchmarks later and other synthetic tests. The 1-to-1 ratio pointed out in my RAM means that the RAM speed is matched with the memory controller speed. It can help with further optimizing performance, so I just wanted to call out what that meant. Because my AMD system from Alienware shipped with XMP off, which is not supposed to be the case in the production side, I did do some measurements with XMP disabled versus enabled just to showcase the difference. On CPU-Z, the difference is basically non-existent and within the margin of error, but it was clear and consistent that the Intel i9 had a higher performing CPU for this particular test. I measured wattage consumption at the outlet for the tower itself, not the monitor, and I basically did a stress test using CPU-Z to max out all CPU cores. The wattage consumption can vary a little bit here because it depends on your fan profile and your pump speed. So if it ramps up for a longer period of time, you can expect the wattage to increase just slightly, but this was taken after an average of running for a little over a minute. This did point out an issue I had with my own custom built unit because I didn't know the idle power consumption was so much higher than a baseline of what's possible with a well-optimized 9950X3D. The Intel one is easily the most power efficient one here. It has the lowest idle power and it's also less noisy on the fan side. I decided to look a little bit further into the voltage, clock speeds, and temperatures of the Alienware Area-51 with the AMD chip and compared it to my own. The orange line represents my custom machine and the red line represents the Alienware Area-51. Even though the operating systems were clean on both machines and I didn't have extra background processes running, you can clearly see that my custom system had a higher idle frequency. It didn't power down as much as the Alienware did. During stress tests, my unit had slightly higher clock speeds. It's not a big difference, but it is about 100 megahertz, and that was pretty consistent. Stress testing did point out that the Alienware chip ran noticeably hotter than my own. Again, these are the same CPUs, and mine was running at a higher frequency. Now, the fans on the Alienware system weren't clocked to an extreme level or anything, so you wouldn't know it's running this hot, and these temps are still within a safe, operable range for that chip. It was just interesting that we got closer to those limits. When I looked at the same frequency response chart, but then compared it to the voltage reading, I got opposite results. So under idle, my CPU had noticeably higher voltage, and that could explain the higher idle power consumption. When I was stress testing though, the Alienware system actually surpassed mine, having a higher operating voltage of about 0.1. Comparing the clock speed, voltages, and temperatures of both machines really helped me learn a lot about power tuning and making the most out of it, and I think Alienware has done a great job on the idle power consumption, but personally I think a little bit more can be done to help reduce temperatures under load. The opposite is said of my system, where I can clearly do a lot more work where idle temperatures, which is where it spends most of its time. However, under load, I'm pretty happy with the performance. Looking at 7-zip benchmarks, the Area-51 with the AMD chip was pretty much identical to the performance of my custom system with AMD, and even with XMP disabled, I got comparable performance with a slight regression in compression tests. The older and more power-hungry i9-13900K did outperform the Intel i9-285K found in the Area-51, but it is worth noting that it consumed quite a bit more power to do so. And because I still have a 3950X machine here at the house, I wanted to provide the benchmarks as well just to have a comparison. Taking a look at productivity benchmarks, I used Puget Bench to measure Premiere, After Effects, and Photoshop. I decided to measure XMP on and off with the 9950X3D on the Alienware system, and all of the results are comparable to each other. The best performing one consistently was the Alienware 9950X3D with XMP enabled. There was a noticeable performance loss with XMP disabled, and in some cases that actually put the Intel i9-285K found in the other Area-51 ahead of the 9950X3D, so RAM can make a big difference. The Intel i9-285K did fall further behind in Photoshop benchmarks. It's still a good performer here, and considering the power efficiency, it's not bad, but it's definitely beat by the AMD chip. Getting into gaming benchmarks, I wanted to do something different and look at games that I actually enjoy playing because I wanted to see how these systems compared to each other. Starting with Arc Raiders, it's harder to measure this game consistently because of the way the game is built. It's very dynamic. However, I made the exact same settings, went to the exact same scene, and did the same mouse movement, and then recorded that benchmark 3 times. These numbers represent an average of that benchmark, and as a result, I feel like I got pretty consistent results. The 9950X3D in my custom system had the highest frame rates, and it had the best 1% lows and 0.1% lows, so it was consistently the fastest machine here. Interestingly, the 13900K came in second place even over the other 9950X3D found in the Alienware. Because Arc Raiders has an anti-cheat system, the only way I was able to play it on the 9950X3D Area-51 machine was to disable the test mode and enable secure boot. Doing this was the only way I could test Arc Raiders on the new Area-51 computer, but I think we'll get better performance later when the signed drivers ship with the production samples. I just wanted to present the data I got in the pre-production version just in case. Using the new multiplayer benchmark found in Black Ops 7, I did a 1080p test with the minimum graphics preset. I enabled NVIDIA image scaling, set the field of view to 115, the VRAM target was set to 70, and of course all of these were with a 5090. My custom built system had the highest performance here again, showing the benefit of higher performing RAM with tighter timings and the 1:1 ratio with the memory controller, but it was followed fairly closely behind by the Area-51 with the 9950X3D. The i9-13900K came in third place here, which was a good showing, and it was followed by the Area-51 with the 9950X3D and XMP disabled. That was still enough power to eke out a performance edge over the i9-285K found in the other Area-51. Jumping over to Call of Duty Warzone, again, there's no specific benchmark for this. I basically hopped into Battle Royale Casuals, went to the exact same spot on top of Stadium, and did the same mouse movement, measured it at least 3 times and averaged it out. It's a familiar showing here, with once again the 9950 X3D found in my custom system having the strongest performance, followed again by the 13900K, which seems to do really well with Call of Duty titles. The Area-51 with the AMD 9950 X3D came in 3rd place here. Again, this is with XMP enabled, and then the Area-51 with the Intel i9-285K rounded up the bottom in 4th. I ran the exact same test again multiple times in 4K on each machine, and I used the extreme graphics preset, so everything was cranked out. DLSS was enabled and set to balanced, again same field of view, VRAM target, and GPU. This was one of the most interesting results because the 13900K had consistently the best performance. It wasn't just the average frame rate being the best and comparable to my other custom built system, but the 1% lows and 0.1% lows were also the best here. In 3rd, we have the Area-51 with the AMD chip, and in 4th, the Area-51 with the i9. The game engine in Warzone is a little bit older now, so I think it just favors the older architecture found in the other Intel chip, but these are all decent showings regardless. Moving on to Cyberpunk 2077, I measured it in 1080p and 4K. In 1080p, I used the low preset, resolution scaling was off, and again, these all use the same GPU. The custom built system had the edge here again, but it was very closely followed by the 9950X 3D on the Alienware system, so this was a good showing here. The 13900K came in 3rd place here, and that was followed by the Intel system found in the other Area-51. There was a noticeable hit on performance on the Area-51 when XMP was disabled. This was the biggest performance delta I observed in gaming when I was toggling that profile. The differences are almost non-existent with 4K gaming and Cyberpunk. In this case, I used the Ray Tracing Overdrive preset, DLSS was enabled with the quality preset turned on, and path tracing was enabled as well. Again, this represents an average of measurements, but the 9950X3D found in the custom system and the Alienware both consistently had the best minimum frame rates as well, and that can help with stutters in game at certain times. It seems that Cyberpunk likes faster RAM speeds because there was even a performance delta in 4K gaming with XMP disabled on the Area-51 using the AMD chip. The last benchmark I want to show is the CS2 Benchmark tool, which was added via the workshop function in Steam to CS2. I like this because it produces consistent results, and if you're tuning memory timings and clock speeds, it makes a huge difference in this game, and it's very apparent here. Again, this is an average of multiple runs per machine, and what you're seeing here with over 700 frames per second on the custom system is a result of tight RAM timings and the 1:1 ratio with the memory controller. The Area-51 with the AMD chip and XMP enabled is not far behind. This is super close here, and it's followed by the i9-13900K just because that one is too running a pretty fast memory timing. The 9950 X3D with XMP disabled is still enough to take a lead over the Intel i9-285K that rounds out the bottom.
I think for the most part, the AMD system is the way to go, just because if you're already spending this much, it's not much more, and there is significantly more performance potential and overhead on gaming. It's not as apparent if you're playing like Cyberpunk with 4K epic presets and ray tracing. Like if you max out everything, you're talking only 1 or 2 frames per second of a difference from the Intel versus the AMD one. It's more apparent when you get into lower resolutions, high frame rates. And not everyone is going to be doing that now, but what could happen is if you buy this system in 2 or 3 years from now, you still have it and you're using it, then a super fast video card comes out that's even quicker than a 5090. Technically, the AMD system is going to scale better with that. So there might be even bigger gaps that come down the road. Whereas the Intel system, it's clearly not doing much better than the older Intel chips. It's just more power efficient. So because of all of that, I would lean towards the AMD one if you're just seeking maximum performance, but Intel does have a couple little extra benefits now. I already mentioned the lower power consumption for moderate to gentle use, like everyday office productivity type stuff. The other advantage Intel has is the QuickSync chip inside. It has a media transcoder, encoder, decoder with QuickSync, and you can do a lot of transcodes at the same time. So if you're also using this as a Plex server, for example, the RTX 5090 has encoder and decoder support. So if you're using it for streaming content for, movie files in-house or using it for live streaming, the 5090 is still plenty for that. Intel's advantage on QuickSync has been that it has a 10-bit 422 hardware support, which is very efficient. It's not using any CPU overhead for that. That helps a lot with streaming and video editing software, but it's not as much of a difference now because the 5090. However, if you are using it for something like Plex, the amount of simultaneous transcodes is kind of a unique selling point for Intel. So I think if you're in that market, you already know what you can and can't do with that stuff, but it is worth pointing out. The other thing is the Intel system does boot faster. That's typical. AMDs always take longer to boot, and this was no difference. I was almost 10 seconds longer to get to the desktop on the AMD system versus Intel, which is quite significant if you're constantly turning it on and off. But, you know, I'm patient enough. I can hit the power button and go get my coffee and be good to go. So at the end of the day, I hope you found this video helpful in comparing two flagship builds from Alienware and also explaining some of the differences of pros and cons from Intel versus AMD if you didn't know that already. I wanted to do something kind of different with this video, and obviously I'm newer to the computer hardware side of things. So if you have specific preferences or information you're looking for, you like or dislike this format, I'm always looking to get better and make better content for you all so you get the most out of your time. Shoot me a comment below, let me know what you think of this format and what you're looking for so I can help better address that in the future. With that being said, thank you so much for watching this and making it to the end. I'll see you at the next one. Take care.